the care and compassion for the community specifically here in Greenville.
Well, thanks, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stacey Mills, and I felt, like I might ought to adjust my bio so that people don't think I just jumped in somebody's pulpit. I am ordained through the Baptist Association in Spartanburg, and have been a part of the Enoree River Baptist Association here in Greenville for the duration of my pastorate. And really being involved in justice work in this community is really, my approach is very organic. I've raised my children in this community. My wife and I, as have been mentioned in the bio, have raised our 3 children who all grew up here in Greenville. 2 of the 3 were born in hospitals here in this community, and attended Christ Church Episcopal Preschool, and 2 of them at the lower school, and then finished through the public school system in Greenville. My wife has been a high school biology teacher for 23 years at the same school at Eastside High School. So we feel very much a part of this community, and our lived experience suggests that beyond just the borders of the Mills house, that we ought to be concerned about the experiences of other people in our community. And so we've given ourselves, both in the classroom, in the pulpit, and in the streets of Greenville, to be a part of that. And we approach this work very altruistically, believing in the spirit of the people of Greenville, and happy to be a part of that.
Thank you, Matt, and everyone. Good afternoon. It is an honor to be with you all today. I'm going to try to look at the screen, friends on the screen as well. I'm a native Greenvillian. I was born here. My dad was pastor of McCarter Presbyterian Church on Pelham Road and East North Street. And my mom was a teacher. And we moved when I was 9 to a small town, Great Falls, South Carolina, which is south of Rock Hill. And it was quite the culture shock to go from Greenville, even in the 70s or early 80s, to Great Falls, which had one stoplight and everyone was related. Or at least it felt that way. And I was called a Yankee because I did not speak in the way that Great Falls folks did. But I say that to say we all belong somewhere. Mm-hmm. And my understanding of God has always been the place of belonging. And if people don't feel like they belong, I take responsibility in that. And so for me, people belonging, that definition can mean different things. For some people, it's having a home. For some people, it's having a community. For some people, it is knowing that they are loved. And so if that is my role, that is my role. And so that's why I'm involved in justice ministry, because for the first time in my 50 years, I have a place where I can be active in my faith and not just practice mercy, but I can actually do justice. Mm. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
I will take the mic just to ask the question, and then I'll sit back down. All right, well, thank you. And here's my first question. Goal is a little different from most nonprofits that do work through congregations, in that Goal is not asking anyone to volunteer for a day, or to go help put a roof on a new affordable home being built. What is unique about Goal's approach to addressing affordable housing and mental access to mental health and advocating for positive change?
Yeah, I think the strongest point, or one of the strongest points about how Goal approaches this work, is its grassroots mobilization. You have clergy who are very much involved, and I fully appreciate that. And I want to be clear that in the 27 years that I've had the privilege of pastoring Mountain View in this community, I've never seen any action that brought as many clergy from diverse backgrounds together. And if we did nothing but the tech study and the clergy caucuses, I would still just be as moved by the work that we're doing, because there is what I would consider a spirit about Greenville If you haven't been to a Nehemiah Action, to see the people show up and who are just interested in getting to better in our community and working together is very inspiring to me as a person, a member of this community, but as a clergy person who's actually involved in all of this. So the house meetings that happen very organically in people's homes and as a part of what happens in the congregations, that people are inviting their friends and others who are fellow parishioners in churches and or neighbors to be involved in a discussion. And that being very informed by the nature of how we selected the issues that we were going to champion for that cycle, and the research that's done to support that and be shared with each of those. It is really a download of information to everyday people who are a part of this community and an invitation for them to have their voices heard. And that to me is probably one of, if not the strongest feature about mobilizing this community to participate in justice.
I would say two things are unique about GOAL in our approach. The first one is people power. So when you get enough people together who may not agree on everything, but they're moved by the topics enough to show up, that's people power, and that gets people's attention. The second thing I would say is unique about GOAL is listening, the listening process. So even though we have, this is a national organization or a national model, DART, I'll say that, and we go by a lot of the DART, direct action research and training. We go by a lot of the DART qualifications, if you will, but we don't go by all of them. And we're still trying to figure out some of those. We're new. You know, I've been a part of the process for almost 3.5 years, Stacey as well, but we have been around for 2 years. This is our second year. What I say about the listening process is I'm at Triune and I wasn't going to have house groups. A lot of people don't have houses or homes at Triune. And so I felt the freedom to change the language on that. And we call them communication groups on purpose. So even when they go to larger meetings, they say, we don't have house meetings, Pastor Jennifer. No, we don't. We have communication groups. And instead of the question, what keeps you up at night? Again, a lot of our folks, there's a lot that keeps them up at night. And we say, what's at the top of your prayer list? Or what are you praying most about? So we can find ways to alter the way we're asking the question, but the process of listening is still very much at the forefront. So I would say people power and listening, truly listening to people who feel like they don't belong or they don't have a voice, is the different approach that GOAL takes.
Thank you, love that. And you mentioned how long y'all have been a part of GOAL and it's officially been active for a couple of years. And I think back to those first few meetings that were held just to see if Greenville could support a justice ministry like this. And I've always said that Village Engage had a big part in tilling the soil for it to take root. But between then and now, what would you say are the most powerful and valuable things you have learned about this particular kind of ministry and about this particular approach to faith-based advocacy?
It's hard. So I am Southern and I'm a people pleaser. But the older I become, I'm learning to hold the tension. But in our space, we have to hold the tension. And one of the hardest things is letting go of control. As a leader, I want to make sure we got control of the situation. And in GOAL, when people speak, first of all, not one person can speak on behalf of GOAL. And that's the tricky part. Or when people speak and I might not agree with the technique that they're doing, and it reflects on me as a leader, that's hard. And yet at the same time, I feel like my image is kind of like a person holding their hands out in a prayerful meditation where you're holding space. Kind of like you all do in your rules of trust and engagement, is you create the space and you hold the space for the tension. And that's been hard. So that's a learning for me, both as a leader and a pastor, is, I mean, people in our own congregations who might disagree with one another. You know, we live in such a polarizing time where civil civil discourse feels like it's dead in many ways, and that is so sad. But what I've appreciated about the process, even though it's been hard, is that I have really gained some wonderful relationships through hard conversations where we didn't leave the room, and where we left the room feeling like we had both spoken truth, but we left the room not disliking one another, if that makes sense. So it's hard. There's no easy part about this community organizing. And there's sometimes I'm sure I make people mad, and I'm sure there's sometimes where I get angry and frustrated. But that's kind of the beautiful piece of this 1,600 people showing up. That gives me hope. And it gives the people who feel like they don't belong hope as well.
Thanks, Jennifer, for that. I think, and you got to forgive me if I am moved a little bit by where we are in this space. When you talk about the relationships that have been formed both among clergy and among lay members and clergy, and in multiple different directions, this is a growing organization where people are learning each other. And at the last board meeting, a member of Goal said to me, who's a leader from their church, said, you know, I really think we're missing an opportunity to get to know each other. We're, you know, focused a lot on the business of Goal, that we aren't spending time across from each other, sharing, or in a relaxed environment, I think is what the word was. But it's Dr. Martin King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he wrote, "It is the silence of my colleagues, of other brothers and sisters, that challenges him in that sense," paraphrasing. And for me, what is amazing and not so hard is seeing this community respond. What's hard is, as Jennifer mentioned, we are the representatives of Greenville, geographically speaking, on the national level when it comes to the DART operation. That's the national franchise, if you will. We are a franchisee as it relates to our community, but they don't have the script for the success that we've had. And so that is uniquely Greenville. And we can lead in that space and push back a little bit. What concerns me is that there isn't a cookie cutter model that should be applied when the goodwill of people is showing up. For instance, no DART affiliate had 1,500 people show up at their first Nehemiah action and have all of the elected officials who were present respond in the affirmative to each of the questions that were asked. So that's kind of a fumble at the top of the organization chart to say, how do we deal with that? When holding the tension is what we continue to do, and I think we should. But I think we should also give room for the second thing is that our second Nehemiah action, we have more than 1,600 people show up. In Charleston and in Columbia, those numbers went down for their second meeting, as opposed to in Greenville going up. And I can still see, sitting on that stage, looking out into the audience, just to see of people who want to be led, who are trusting and wanting justice. They want change. How do we get there? How do we achieve that? Is what I think is uniquely a gift to us to be able to figure that out. The last thing I'll say about this that I've learned is to, like Jennifer said, release leadership to other leaders that are in the room. You don't always have to lead from the front. And there are other people with a vested interest in the success of Greenville. And the other thing is, this is inherently a faith movement. There are multiple faiths represented across the breadth of goal. And we have to remember that. And our organizational structure leaves room for us to invite all of those expressions to this work. And we do that without overshadowing anybody.
Can I add one more thing? May I add one more thing? The other thing is the DART model, that's kind of, I don't want to use the word forced upon us, but that's the model, right, that we subscribe to. And we're discovering that we don't like a lot of that model. For example, we send out certified letters to all the elected officials, and many of them were offended, understandably so. But we didn't know the process. And the reason why DART does that is because there are many cities where people say, I never got that. The elected officials make excuses. And so DART has made that a blank. That's how they train all their organizers to do that. We didn't know that. But again, our names are on it, right? So it's learning.
And out of 1,630 plus people, ours are the only two names on those letters. Yeah. That show up at somebody's house.
Right. And it doesn't seem to Russell's here, to those who are elected to seem very friendly. And that's not our intention. Our intention is not to not be friendly, but we're following a model that we really had no control over. But now we know, and so we want to change that. And we want to leave room for trust and relationships, but also to hold people accountable. And that's a tension, again, that we're holding. So I just wanted to set the record straight that we're following a model that we don't agree fully with. And we're learning and adapting. This is our second year. And I know that that's what I'm learning, is that we don't have to follow that model. And we're teaching the organizers that as well, as we don't know if we want to follow everything, but we still want to hold that tension to hold people accountable.
Great. That was a good word. Thank you. And Stacey, you talked about sometimes the personal relationships kind of get overlooked because you show up to the meetings and there's work to do. There's an agenda to go through. That's a good segue to this next question. And we mentioned earlier that the way the listening process in the fall starts is at those house meetings, at the communication groups, gatherings. The question, what keeps you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, or what are you thinking about? What's at the top of your prayer list? So this question is to you personally. Mm-hmm. It's May of 2024. Goal has been officially active for almost 2 years. What keeps you awake at 3 a.m.?
And my response to that, Matt, is very literal. I'm a dad, and our youngest son just graduated high school on Tuesday from Greenville High, headed off to Indiana Wesleyan to play football. And there are a number of things. I chaired for our city the Public Safety Review Advisory Council that reviewed all of the public safety policy for police officers in the city of Greenville during the time of the George Floyd murder, where we all were at home and we saw this. And, the conversation that I've had with my boys, even living in Greenville, is just get home, just make it home. We can deal with everything else. And so when they're out, and, 2 of my 3 live on their own and, in other cities. So I'm wondering how they're doing, wondering how they're being treated, regardless of their accomplishments. Our oldest is an officer in the United States Army, having graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. But that doesn't matter when, it comes to a traffic stop on a road at nighttime. So beyond housing in our community, or not beyond, in addition to the people that we see, my church is off of West Washington Street. And I remember you know, when I first started pastoring there, I didn't live here. I lived in Spartanburg. And every morning on my way into the office, I was a stop at the West Washington Street Post Office. And I would be greeted with people who had been out on the street all night long. And 27 years ago, that was true. And 27 years later, it's still true. So those things, among what can we do to change this dynamic in our community, how my personal lived experience, my obligation as a pastor leader in this community, and as a resident of the city of Greenville, what are we doing to make this lived experience for all people better? The other piece of that is I've spent a good bit of time, not only in education with our school district here and higher ed, but also with adjacent to our healthcare system. As the chair of the Greenville Health Authority Board of Trustees and a member of that board for almost a decade and a half, there's a lot that's happening in our community around healthcare, the Greenville Free Medical Clinic. There are so many issues. And this process of identifying what the issues are for each cycle is a powerful one to which I submit wholly. And so we champion the cause that the group has identified. I'm looking forward to us getting on to other issues and being inclusive of the issues that we've already championed.
So as the pastor at Triune, I would say what keeps me up at night has to do with mental health and affordable housing. The three things I would say about that. The first one is when I first got to Triune in the midst of COVID, none of us as leaders knew how to navigate COVID. But coming into a new place as a pastor was a unique challenge, especially following Deb Richardson Moore. But what I discovered is that our social workers were depressed. Now, not clinically, but they were gloomy because normally they could get some people housed. There was a woman who owned 150 mobile homes off White Horse Road, and she rented them out for $450 a month. And she did not do a criminal background check, which is a huge barrier for a lot of the folks we serve. And so because she didn't do that, we housed a lot of folks in that mobile home park. Well, during COVID, rightly so, her right, she sold those mobile homes. And there went a lot of places for the folks we were serving. So I watched our social workers go into this depression where they felt like they weren't doing anything. Then I heard my colleagues talk about at the shelters at Salvation Army and Miracle Hill how they're bottlenecking. So I would meet men at Miracle Hill Rescue Mission who were working for 4 years, saving money, and they still could not afford a place to live. Now, I don't know about you all, but I sometimes in my privilege say, well, gosh, I got in a good time. I got in 11 years ago. But that's an awful way to look at it because everybody deserves dignity in a place of belonging.
Sure.
And so I am up at night because we don't have sufficient affordable housing for those who are 30% and below the annual median income. So an example is Greenville Homeless Alliance has a grant from the Piedmont Health Foundation, upon which I sit on the board, and they are funding a position called a housing navigator. And what she has discovered in her 6 months is that she can't find a place under $650. Now, if you're on disability, the average is about $970 a month. So $970 a month in a place, the minimum is $650. So what we're having to do is to go back to places and funders and say, we need subsidy. We need to subsidize so that people can pay $450. But even that is not long-term. So how as a community do we provide housing for those at 30% and below? I even I've been to several events. I try to go as many as I can because I believe if I'm gonna do this, I need to invest. But I find myself frustrated that we need workforce housing, we need all kind of housing. But if I don't advocate for those I'm serving and we're serving at Trying, I don't know who will. And mental health goes hand in hand for a lot of those folks. Not all of them are drug dealers, not all of them are, all the stereotypes, but people are suffering, you guys. And it's getting hot. And it's just, I feel helpless sometimes. So that's what keeps me up at night.
And Matt, one of the other things that I would add to that is we're pastors. Jennifer talks about being called to her charge at Trying. What a unique circumstance to pastor in, and be a director of the Mercy Center at the same time. Sunday's coming for us, so that keeps me up at night as well. You know, the message to the people who are sitting in the pews wanting guidance and spiritual understanding, all of that encapsulated by our humanity as human doing this work in this community.
You mean you're human?
My wife told me to take the garbage out.
Wonderful, thank you. And I've got a couple more questions, but I did want to make sure that you folks here in this space and on Zoom had a chance to offer up a question. So if you have one, just raise your hand and I'll ask it on your behalf so that the Zoom folks can hear it. Yes.
So I'm new to Greenville. I've been here for 3 years, and I've been involved in a number of different organizations within the community. And I've watched Goal. I went to the first meeting, and in my heart, I've heard a lot of talk and a lot of meetings. And what I want to know from you is, how can I help you move the needle?
Wow. Okay, so the question is, I've been to meetings and I've heard a lot of talk and conversation. And then Ms. Atkins, yes, Bernadine Atkins says, what can I do to help you move the needle?
I'm sure we have different answers for that. And I'm going to take the lead and just say, one, for me, stay plugged in. You know, please give consideration that Goal is very young, that 2 years. And when we think about success, it can be measured in many ways. So we are very successful in having people show up to meetings. We're successful in interacting with our elected officials. We are forming as far as organizational structures go. So when you think about an actual business organizational model, it's forming. We have 2 staff that are managing nearly 30 congregations. And the prescription is that one organizer per 10 congregations. And we're at 27, 28 registered organizations with more churches wanting to join. So that's a heavy lift for us. So what I would say is be optimistic and stay hopeful. And yes, where your skill set is really concerned, don't hesitate plugging in. There are ways to get involved. There are committees around this work. And if you see yourself as a part of that and wanting to engage, we welcome it. And don't shy away from telling the story about your experience and why you're vested in this kind of work. I think that's one of the things that turns the light on for me, is that listening process and hearing what other people have to say. I know what my lived experience looks like. I can share that, but having a cup of coffee with somebody who has had a lived experience, whether it's around housing or mental health or whatever other issues there are that we may tackle in the future, it's important. And that's a part of the people power.
In addition to what Stacey said, I would say to keep investing in the community. Listen to people who are different from you, find out their stories, offer to walk alongside of them, let them know they belong and that you belong. The harder part is to give money, give time, and show up at the people power. I mean, that's how we build, invite people. If you're a part of a faith community that's not involved, try to get your faith community involved. If you're not a person of faith, you still can be involved in Goal. Just knowing though that we are faith-based, we're an interfaith organization. But at the same time, you know, I have people coming to Triune who are part of the group who either aren't involved in a community of faith or they are, but their community of faith is not doing that. So I invite you to get involved, get a group, have a conversation group, get involved with the process, and live that process out for at least 2 years. I didn't know in the beginning what the heck we were getting into. You know, we trusted, we tried to trust. I know I've grown closer to this one because you have to, the tension and the, you know, a lot of people say, well, y'all are making me uncomfortable or this is adversarial. Sometimes it has to be to get people heard because people are tired of being told over and over again, we're going to do something, we're going to do something. And maybe it's not the role of the government, or maybe it's not, you know, but as people of faith, I believe we have a big role. And if nothing else, we build people power in a place to create a space where people can be heard. Not just heard, but hopefully acted upon. But that takes time too, and that's hard when you've been told over and over again.
Thanks, and I'll add that just specifically, there are 2 avenues to becoming involved in primarily or in general. One is to, if your congregation is looking for team leaders, you can ask to be a team leader, go through that quote unquote training and become a team leader. That helps with the grassroots side of this. And then each of the community problems, affordable housing and access to mental health, there are research or action committees associated with each of those. And if one speaks to you a little more, you can ask about joining one of those research committee or action committees.
How do I go about that?
But we can talk afterwards, but yeah, very good.
Thank you.
And we have a website, goaljustice.org.
But really, you just reach out to someone.
.com.
And you can be.
I get confused, yeah, .com.
You can be connected to that. All right, another question from folks in the room? Yes.
I'm Jeff Lawson. I believe that our community leaders have worked hard to be responsive to the request for affordable housing. And Goal does have a people power and commitment behind it, as demonstrated by the number of individuals that go to the churches. So now I wonder if it's time for those individuals to show their commitment to the elected officials and discuss the idea of a permanent millage to be placed before the people of the city of Greenville and then possibly before the people of the county to have a constant income for affordable housing, Habitat for Humanity, development of little houses, the ability to integrate our Greenville link with the little houses so that they deliver individuals who are in the low income category to work downtown, to work at the hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. Is it time to turn the tables on the people that show up to say, are you committed enough to discuss the possibility of a millage and how much millage would you need to have an effective continued income that would supplement the amount of money that the county and the city bring to it?
If you'll just try to regurgitate for them. Maybe, if you can.
Matt just asked me to restate what he said. Well, I'll say this. The question in the room was, is it time to ask for a permanent millage from both the city and the county? And
But
I'm
the
gonna,
goal members, I
that,
heard him say the goal
that
members
goal members
are
ask
willing
for-
to put up for a millage
Right,
themselves.
right. You might should have restated it. My first response is, wow. You're seated next to the chair of the housing steering committee, and the research team, Kat Stellan, ladies and gentlemen, is here with us. And what I love about this, the fact that it is an organic process that we're going through. These are the kinds of ideas that help support what's next for us when we move from here and what the next questions are. I think that is a remarkable tool in the toolbox to help us get to the next level. And I, for one, would get right behind you to support that kind of thing, because, you know, oftentimes we resort to what's comfortable in our community. And what we've always done, we've never had a millage specifically for affordable housing and the creation of tidy home communities. That would be a remarkable path forward, or a statement for our community to rally behind.
Personally, I would definitely get behind that.
Yeah.
I can't speak for all of Goal.
Right.
But personally, I would get behind that. And I would ask you, would you join us?
Well, I'm as Reverend Mills goes, I'm a catalyst and I'm a validator. And so I give money and then I validate that the project that I've supported actually will be completed and will have impact. And so.
So you hold people accountable
Well.
once you give your money. That's great.
Because I give money I set the bar. And then people go out to raise money and they'll say, yeah, I'm excited about this and I want to give money, and they'll say, well, what about $2,000? And then they'll say, well, Dr. Lawson gave us $10,000. And then they say, well, if he's a retired doctor, well, maybe that means I have to give more than the 2,000. And so that's the way I've always worked at Grover Mountain, Clemson University, Washington and Lee, Greenville High School. I always set the bar. So I'm always happy to set the bar. And because of my experience in the community, I'm a validator. So they know, oh, if Dr. Lawson's behind it, that means that it's going to work and we're going to get this done.
Sure. So for folks online, I would just like to acknowledge Dr. Jeff Lawson's presence in the room. And if you don't know him and aren't familiar, the things that he's sharing with us about extending people power to a place of influence. And he's talked about his validation of movements in our community by his giving of his personal resources to support that, and then also encourage other people in his network to be able to give likewise. So I want to salute you and just say publicly, I appreciate what you have done, especially in the realm of our community and bringing these issues. And glad to have you at the table where Goal is concerned. And I sincerely mean that invitation for you to join in that space for us, because you know, one of the things is we don't know what we don't know until we're at that table and in that room unpacking these ideas. And that one is a magnificent idea.
You mean you're human?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Other questions? Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. I can't remember who it was that told me they needed to be somewhere about 1:30. Oh, it wasn't. Yes.
I was interested in what you were talking about, Jennifer, about I'm sorry, about some people subsidizing, so giving a subsidy that would be, I guess, ongoing subsidy for somebody's rent. I'm just wondering, are there people who are doing that now? And then can you even find housing, you know, if people will subsidize?
Questions about rent subsidies, maybe even locally.
Yeah. So Matt and I are co-chairing a working group with the Greenville Housing Fund called Rent Stabilization, and it's looking into faith organizations. And I know Wendell Jones is also looking at a bill for getting churches or faith organizations. I'm trying to get I'm used to church vernacular, getting congregations to, if they have land, to explore what that looks like to develop affordable housing or tiny homes or whatever on their land, on their property. But I would say also, yes, to that question, the impact fund for the Greenville Homeless Alliance, currently, they're exploring along with the Greenville, the Piedmont Health Foundation to have subsidy. They have additional monies other than the housing navigator that they put in. And there's a group called Coffee Club, which is a group of service providers. They meet at Triune every Monday in the afternoon. And what they're doing is, it's taken us a little while, we're getting there, but she would present 650, 750, and Triune staff never spoke up because our folks can't even afford that. And it would be irresponsible of our social workers to set people up for failure. They already are there, right? And so what I said is, let's make a chart so that we have what the rent's going to be to get it to 450. So whatever that subsidy is, that could come through the impact fund at Greenville Homeless Alliance, but also through the Piedmont Health Foundation. And I do know, I don't want to name specific funders, but I do know there's conversation with several funders in the Greenville area to set up just for subsidizing, because that's the reality of where we are. And these are folks who work downtown in restaurants, washing dishes, bus boys or bus girls, you name it. They're all, downtown, some of them working and don't have a place to live close by.
And those wheels have to keep working at the same time. So while you've got these organizations working on the subsidies, then the developers bringing forth or bringing additional housing options online, that work has to be done as well. And so we have scarcity on the housing side where people actually can live. So that's important. Jennifer is busy. She's not mentioned the homeless court that convenes at Triune, and how people have connections to the legal system that also prevent them from being able to get into stabilized housing. And also in this conversation is not mentioned the Greenville Housing Authority that also issues these vouchers and subsidies, but lack the available numbers of units to get people moved in. So there's a lot of work having to happen at the same time that this is going on. And I think remarkably is keeping churches or organizations, faith organizations that are a part of this, who have land that can develop. I know that Mountain View, the church that I pastor, is in the process of doing that. So, we don't want the floodgates to open and overwhelm us because we're a church and we're learning this process. We're not willing to turn over the land for somebody else to develop it. We are becoming the developers and have organized Parish House Community Development Corporation to do just that. And we're taking the painstaking time and steps to get this right so that we hold the balance of what is responsible growth around our community and around our neighborhood as well.
Will you remind them when the DHEC meeting is?
So yes, there is a Bramlett site cleanup in question that has to do with environmental issues, contamination that happened in the neighborhood where Mountain View Baptist Church is due to the Bramlett manufactured gas plant site that was located on Bramlett Road. DHEC has a voluntary cleanup contract that is active with Duke Energy, and we are at the end of that contract, and there will be a public meeting that is a part of that process held at Mountain View, conducted by DHEC on June the 6th at 6 p.m. 6
We need
p.m.
lots
They
of
just
people
recently
there.
changed. Yeah, we do need you there, and we want you there with the lens of returning this to the community for a viable asset in its most pristine form for Greenville. So yeah, that's June 6th, 6 p.m. at Mountain View Baptist Church, 111 Cagle Street. Tell your friends and family to show up for that.
All right, I've got one more really quick question, but I did want to mention before I send them out and get Stacey to where he needs to get to. It was not very convenient for them to be here today, but they're here because they care about Greenville, and I just love that about you too. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
My last question is a question that my wife poses to me and the family a lot, and I love it. So it's a follow-up to what's keeping you up at 3 a.m. in the morning. This question is briefly, what is saving you currently?
Yeah, wow.
Mm.
Wow. So I'll end where I began. I had our youngest child graduated on Tuesday, and so that caused our older two children to make their way home, and it's family. And I think holding balance, as much as we're holding tension, we have to hold balance, and that is to rely very heavily on the things and the people that we love, and to pause and celebrate that. And I like to be outside in the yard and get my fingers in the dirt. And so, you know, being a husband and a father and, you know, all those things.
Besides the obvious of my faith, I would say my family and the outdoors. We live in a beautiful place. I went hiking the other day with the staff. They voted to go hiking. I mean, we work in very intense everyday environment, and they said, we want to go to Paris Mountain, and we went hiking, and it was amazing. We saw turtles, and it's just the things we take for granted, right? And we talked about, how do we talk about our love for hiking with people who live outdoors? How do we do that? You know, and I got in a kayak the other day, and I was like, why don't I do this more often? So those are the things that are saving me. Getting in the dirt, I love working in the yard. Just the places where you can see fruit of your labor. I worked with college students, y'all, a long time ago, and I didn't see the fruit for years. So I became a gardener because I could see fruition. But you don't see it working with college students until years and years and years later. So
That's true.
that's what's saving me. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your passion and compassion for our community and for your interest in goal. If we can be of any help, let us know. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
I'm gonna call Alicia